Hi all, let's have a look at the very exciting game from round 9 of the FIDE Grand Prix. Fabiano Caruana was playing against Alexander Grischuk. Grischuk is often playing the Kings Indian defence, so a very interesting encounter from a theoretical point of view, because after d4 from Fabiano, knight f6, c4, g6, I would have been expecting personally Grischuk to veer for a King's Indian defence. So this next move indicates that Fabiano is a kind of anti-Gruenfeld defence weapon, which I would personally use against a Gruenfeld expert such as Peter Zvidler. But against Grischuk, who's got good experience in the Saemich Kings Indian lines, this is a very, very interesting choice. Grischuk probably welcomes this sort of move, and he actually played what is the third most popular move in the position, c5. Usually d5 is played, it's kind of neo-Gruenfeld, or bishop g7, that's also popular. These two choices are about 500 games, but this choice c5 together with knight c6, they're both about 120 games in my live book. So c5 was played, and it's a bit strange here. d5 would seem the normal way to sort of transpose it into a Saemich Kings Indian style position. This move which Fabiano plays, possibly a product of preparation, it's breaking a kind of beginner's rule of chess, or a club player's rule of chess, that generally you don't want to capture pawns away from the centre, but it was played d takes c5. There's a few problems just intuitively with this, that these dark squares are also already weakened. This bishop development is delayed. The natural development of the king side has been delayed here. But with the bishop fianchettoing, it's usually also sinful, in inverted commas, to open up more dark square weaknesses when you've already played g6 to fianchetto your bishop. But this is exactly what Grischuk now does. He actually plays e6. So the bishop has changed its mind about fianchettoing. It's trying to collect this pawn, but it will win a fantastic diagonal. The engine here indicates it's an equal position. It really thinks that black has equalised theoretically. The Stockfish engine at depth about 19. If we consider just the standard sort of natural looking move, d5, the engine gives this as a small advantage for white, this position. It just looks like a Saemich Kings Indian. Fairly standard, where white can continue with moves like this and have a nice looking position. But yeah, this creates a strange game, this d takes and then this e6. We're in strange territory here, completely out of live book by move 4. So a very interesting innovation, d takes c5. Personally, it looks a bit on the ugly side though. In conjunction with the f3 move, it looks a bit ugly. And this next move looks even uglier actually, bishop e3. Just any level of chess, I mean, for a beginner would recognise that the bishop's kind of blocked in by the pawn, and now you're blocking the pawn by this bishop. Why is everything blocked in just to hold on to the c5 pawn? The method in the madness is, well, maybe d6, maybe holding on to the pawn is pretty dangerous. Maybe white will castle queenside, maybe the d6 square is going to be major. But black now plays aggressively, Grischuk plays aggressively, dynamic aggressive move to undermine this pawn and just keep these issues that white's lagging development a bit. He plays b6, just basically a pawn sacrifice. Now Fabiano didn't take this, so if he did take it, I mean, this might be one of the strongest moves technically, but this looks miserable. His development looks awkward here. If he takes time to move the bishop so he can move the pawn, so he can move this bishop, this position apparently is equal, even though black is a pawn down, clearly, but the engine indicating this is nearly equal anyway. Black's got good play here, knight c3, maybe the bishop b4. So the bishop not fianchettoing, but this is looking okay for black. But Fabiano actually, after b6, he doesn't take that pawn, he just lets black go potentially equal on pawns after knight c3. Now Grischuk persists with the pawn sacrifice. He could actually just take on c5 to equalise the pawns, and it wouldn't be such a big deal. That d6 square in this engine variation, knight b5 here, apparently this is not too terrible for black, But the thing is, I think this is probably Caruana's idea, that actually after knight d6 coming up, I mean, the bishop is one move away from black castling. So unfortunately, knight d6 is going to happen, or even consider bishop f4 first. Bishop f4 might even be a little bit stronger here, with bishop c7 as an idea to win the queen. This could be a little bit awkward for black, this particular position. I know it's strange, these two pieces without the rest of the army, but what does black actually do here? If he castled, then bishop c7, knight d6, this is a big advantage for white coming up. There's a nice dark square blockade, and it's also winning the exchange. And if b4 here in this particular position, sorry, pardon me, if check, then there's b4, the move b4 is very strong. So if taking here bishop d2, and then now in this position e4, kicking the queen again, and where is the queen actually going? So this is actually quite venomous. If we go back after b6 just to play knight c3, this knight b5 is actually quite serious here as an idea. So that so we looked just now at b takes c5. Knight b5 appears to be very nice for white. Instead of bishop e7, you might say, well, knight c6, just allow knight d6. It's still pleasant enough for white here. White does actually have a good advantage. Any check here, we can actually play king f2. So that's a neat use of the f2 square. Maybe the rook's going to be good just like that. Maybe the rook doesn't have to be castled first to get into the game. So a very, very interesting position here after knight c3. Black actually kept on the gambit though, with bishop a6. So still offering this gambit pawn. And now I think he's actually ruling out knight b5. If knight b5, black could actually just take that off, so he's actually stopping that kind of threat, and then take on c5. So there wouldn't be such a big problem with the d6 square here. If we try to exploit d6 directly, I think this is okay for black. Queen b6, or even check and then taking on b5 might be possible. But yeah, so that's not such a big deal. So bishop a6, the gambit is really on here. Is white accepting this gambit? And does that leave white with the aforementioned issues, you know, the blocked in development here? Okay, so Fabiano Caruana takes on b6, so officially a pawn up now. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 against 6. But both sides are committed kind of breaking the rule type moves. White is captured away from the centre, white is blocked in his development. Black has weakened more dark squares than usual, but for a good reason here. Now bishop g5, starting to unblock things. h6, bishop h4, g5. Technically the engine's like black here overall, and white is also offering, you'll note, this c4 pawn. Okay, can it actually be taken, and why wasn't it taken earlier? That's another good question. Let's have a just quick rewind there. Bishop g5 here. If black had taken on c4 immediately, in this position it's zap time, queen d4. So that's not possible. That's actually winning a piece, it seems. So it was only when, in this position, after h6, the bishop was kicked. If white wants to, I think that's one of the better moves, just to preserve the bishop. So it went back, then another forcing move, bishop f2, and now in this position, without the pressure on f6, now it becomes possible that queen d4 is not winning a piece. So bishop takes c4. Okay, so black is not even a pawn down now, equal on pawns. So e4, but this does forfeit the castling rights. White's castling rights have now been forfeited with this move. So equal on pawns. So an interesting position. Knight c6. This b6 pawn remains visibly a little bit weak though. So knight ge2. And with this knight maneuver, there's knight d4 coming up potentially for knight b5 to occupy that nice b5 square, to keep an eye on d6 as an idea. Bishop c5. Now here, white doesn't really want to take on c5 if he takes on c5, b takes c5, you can see that black's pawn formation is a little bit more solid as one big island there. Maybe d5 with d4 to follow up would be potentially useful. That c5 pawn could be very handy. So that is just kept there. Instead, white goes with knight d4. Okay, so after knight d4, there's actually a structural threat implied here of just taking this knight actually, and then taking this to double black's pawns. Black's pawns would be wretched potentially. So queen e7 helps address that. Knight takes c6. So now if knight takes, bishop takes, we've got queen takes. So knight cb5 was played here, threatening knight c7 check. Black could have just castled here. It doesn't seem that dangerous on engine inspection to castle, although h4 looks very tempting. This position here with h4, apparently black might be okay with g4. Looks a little bit on the risky side, but queen d2 eyeing here. This actually seems as though it might be okay for black. This sort of position. Black could even take here and offer the exchange sack. If he moves the rook here, this is okay for black as well. So I think black could have castled, but instead we see king f8, rather adventurous to manually put the king on g7, perhaps not strictly needed. Okay, so we see a3 taking away that b4 square and threatening now b4 as a serious concern for black in many of the variations coming up now. So now Grischuk actually plays knight takes d4 here. Knight takes d4. And now king g7 is played. Again, h4, I don't think it's that effective because black always has g4 to try and keep the lines closed. Instead, b4 was played. And this looks actually quite interesting now. If, for example, bishop d6, here I think white's slightly better. g3, perhaps with the idea of king g2. That would be nice for the king safety and trying to connect the rooks. But actually black played a very energetic continuation here. Bishop takes d4. Okay, so bishop takes d4, and it looks nasty, this pin now. And in fact, also bishop e5 is interesting, as well as bishop takes b6. Bishop e5 is interesting, just for controlling d6. And h4 is actually much more effective here. So this looks like a serious concern to give white this apparently dangerous dark square bishop. A very interesting idea from Grischuk, this whole conception now. He's going back to his old gambit here of that b pawn. If we try and move the b pawn, then we can see this is going to be nice for white after bishop e5. There's follow-ups of either h4 or bishop d6. It's a nice dark square grip. This could get very painful, for example. ed, we've got a nice pin there. We can even take with the queen. That's possible. So yeah, that dark square bishop is a monster pin on that knight. So Grischuk's idea is actually to immediately close that diagonal to unpin and offer this b6 pawn. For the moment, white's rooks are not connected. If you remember games of Mikhail Tal, often he would pounce on his opponents just before the moment before this small window of opportunity, before opponents could castle. Mikhail Tal would pounce on opponents. Here it seems white has a moment of weakness, that his rooks are not connected, and black's still offering this gambit pawn. So bishop takes b6. Again, white is officially a pawn up again in this position, but now a tempo gaining queen e6. Is the bishop that great in this position? It has to move again, and also black's potentially playing d5 to get a very aggressive looking position where the rooks might be charging down one of the files quickly before the white rooks can even connect here. The bishop retreats, d5, and immediately black is threatening to get a strong protected passed pawn in the centre, among other things. But even more concerned is just taking on e4 just to win material, or just put a rook behind the pawn to threaten all sorts of things. I think actually white would actually prefer d4 here than these other ideas. So queen b3 was played, trying to distract away from d takes. Just taking on e6, that should be okay for white. Let's have a quick look at that. Black in the game, before we look at that, played rook hd8 here. But if black now had played d takes, white's idea was just to take here, and in this position can leave this tension here. Look at the treble pawns, can actually play several moves. a4, there's a 2-0 pawn majority over here. We can just push this. This would be quite nice for white. Potentially this position is okay for white, good for white. So black is not too keen to play d takes e4 here. Black actually just played rook hb8. And okay, what is this actually doing? Well, black is potentially playing check and d takes e4 here. Now, in this position, because he's actually helping control that against b5, you see in this position here, any check, I think there's just b5. It doesn't, potentially it doesn't work as well. Although this is interesting as well. This queen a6 check is actually one of the stronger moves, but maybe the concern was with b5. King f2 here, this position, it looks okay for white. Maybe b5 is useful. So Grischuk is shutting down that b5 possibility by playing this, and he doesn't mind white taking on d5 here. We'll get quite an aggressive knight. The engine indicates, though, e takes d5 might have been technically the way to go here. In this particular position, on e takes d5, and this would require very careful calculation. On knight takes d5, black is now threatening rook takes b4 because of that pin on the rook. The rooks are not connected. So what would white actually play here? But king f2, apparently this might have been playable. So if takes, we can take the queen. There's knight g4 is not that. No, it doesn't do anything. Queen takes g4 there. So this position apparently would have been okay. The rooks are protecting each other against any knight takes b4 threat. So yeah, e takes d5 looks like an opportunity here for white at move 23. But Caruana actually played king e2. And now we see black making use of this check, so without white being able to play b5. Queen d3, and now black actually played queen e6. So keeping the queens on. Here now, queen b3 again, and black plays queen a6. So is this going to be a threefold repetition? Both sides are gaining a bit of moves to get to move 40, where they will get more time. But in this position here, perhaps it would have been best to try and repeat. Caruana actually played e takes d5. This looks a little bit on the dangerous side, even though theoretically it might be in white's favour. White has to play very carefully here. After knight takes d5, this is serious stuff like knight f4 or rook d8. The queen, the king like this, the valuables in the centre of the board, they should be usually locked away or not subject to easily getting tempo gains from. But the king tries to move to safety here to address these issues. This is a very, very accurate move, which we'd expect from Caruana. King f2. Okay, so not minding knight f4 here, for example. I think white, in the event of knight f4, this wasn't played. Rook d8 was played, but in the event of knight f4, then I think white's okay. Bishop takes, and this should be okay for white. This, we can just control this center file, and we do actually. I think we don't have to take the rooks off there. We can just play the check here. So white would have this excellent pawn majority on the queen side. Black has the double pawns, so his pawn majority is not so evident. It's about the same there. So white's got all the prospects in that position from a structural, pass pawn perspective. So yeah, black doesn't really want to do that. Rook d8 was played to threaten knight takes b4 and knight f4 with the attack on the queen. The queen gets out of the way now, but where should the queen go? She actually went to c4 engines suggest b3 might actually be a tiny bit more accurate here. Maybe it's the idea that the C file, the gaining the tempo on the C file, looks potentially lucrative at some point. On b3, the queen would have been shielded by this b pawn, so now immediate trying to reduce the potential for tempo gains. This seems as though this position would be okay for white, with good long-term prospects as well. Okay, but the queen went to c4, so what are the very specific ideas? Well, maybe the idea is that the bishop's going to shield the queen with bishop c5 in any case. We see now queen f5, and now black is immediately threatening knight takes e3 here. This looks actually a very, very serious concern. Knight takes e3. Just bringing the king out is very, very dangerous. Just to demonstrate that, well, in the game, the cautious rook e1 was played, adding solidity to that. If b5, say throwing caution to the wind, knight takes, and if takes, in this position, this is very, very powerful apparently for black. This rook d4 tempo gain, because then we've got queen f4 coming up. So this is pretty nasty. Say like this, check, and it's all over with this rook coming to the 7th rank. It's a menace. So yeah, white's got to be extremely careful. So another careful move. So far, it looks as though no problem. And it doesn't really matter, it seems, because of this rook movement about the tempo gain on the c file. If black took here, for example, and then tried to use the tempo gain now, then this position here with queen e4, this is safe for white after check rook e2. There isn't such a big deal problem here, it seems. Okay, so okay, let's go back. So rook he1, safe so far. Rook ac8, and now this bishop c5. So that was the idea, that the queen can be shielded here. But now black gets in this very dangerous knight move, knight f4. This knight is a very, very naughty knight, as knights go. On a naughtiness scale of 0 to 10, this is a very, very naughty knight, about 8 for all the games I've seen so far in this tournament, because now it's actually threatening to win the exchange immediately with knight d3, for example, but also in conjunction with the rook coming to the 7th rank, it can be even naughtier trying to attack g2. And in fact, the knight is so naughty in this position that even the mighty Fabiano Caruana really cracked up on this next move. Let's just look at what Caruana played king g1. Sorry, before we look at king g1, the issues of protecting g2 and this d file infiltration. Let's have a look. So rook d2 is one of the major threats, but there's also potentially rook takes c5 could be useful as well for rook d2, just to strip away that bishop defense along this diagonal first. So all of these need to be factored in. And not only that, there's rook d4 as a tempo gainer as well, using the pin on the bishop. A lot of attacking possibilities. So Fabiano played king g1 here. If he played, okay, just rule things out. Rook a2, knight d3 check. Black just wins the exchange. Okay. If we try and contest the d file, again, knight d3, it's protected by rook and queen. This is still possible. We just win the exchange. And although white's got the passed pawns, this exchange up here is actually overall in white's favour. It could be tricky for white, this position, but it's a good shot because of 2 passed pawns. It's not so easy for black. It's only a fractional advantage to black technically from an engine perspective. So that might have been a good try, but not wanting to be the exchange down particularly. I think here though, okay, if king f1 had been played, this is subtly different from king g1, and we're about to see why. So that is actually the engine suggestion to maintain a balanced position here, to play actually king f1. Yeah, so it would get away from this knight d3, but we see the move king g1. So maybe there's a natural tendency that humans are creatures of habit, that you want your king on g1 when you castle it's on g1, but actually it might be more optimal to have it on f1 in this particular position, with the rook coming down to the 7th rank, which is often a way of winning games. When people get their rooks to the 7th rank, it's often the winner that does that. So rook d2, it seems as though black now is threatening rook takes g2, but also, unfortunately, there's a loose rook here potentially on e1, and you'll see why this is so critical here. White can't afford to let this g2 pawn drop with, say, king h1. In this event, then rook takes g2. This is horrible. Queen h3. We're going to be on this. We can't really parry this position here. In fact, that's a cute little mate there. So it has to be defended. G2. That rook takes g2 is horrible. There's no little tactical tricks here. Bishop f8 doesn't really help White's king safety. So there's no major tactical tricks. The bishop, although it's got some influence, it's also pinned. So White is forced to play this move, which looks very, very artificial here. After rook d2, White has to defend in a different way, not king h1, but plays rook a2. But this is now the problem, because black actually had dual threats, not just rook here, but knight takes potentially. And in fact, the rook, the weakness of the last move, the rook on e1 is actually loose here. And this spells disaster really. This is now a massive advantage for black at move 33, because knight takes g2 exploits the loose rook on e1. And has completely wrecked White's king safety, isolating 2 pawns in the process. This is a disaster for White, this position. Now, in this particular position, it's just total disaster. Let's see, what on earth can White do here? So his rook's attacked. He took on d2. And after knight takes e1, it's very, very unpleasant from here. It's like +2 for black technically. Just before we go beyond this point though, so this is at move 35, let's look at the subtle difference here. If king f1 has been played, great in hindsight, we see rook d2 again, but rook a2 is more effective here, because the subtle difference is the king is actually protecting the rook. It's not so loose here. There isn't such a powerful weakness of the last move here with rook a2, because the king is holding that rook. So knight takes g2 is not actually a playable move at all here, because rook takes d2 is possible. Black hasn't got anything in this position. Queen takes f3, we play rook f2. If knight takes e1, we just take with the king. We're bishop up. So one tiny little difference, and this is the pain of chess, that even our strongest, one of our strongest, highest rated FIDE players on the planet can get this wrong. In addressing this threat of rook d2, slightly imprecise move, and he's in terrible trouble now in this game continuation. So knight takes g2, so the fracturing of the pawns, threatening now horrible things like knight takes f3. So rook f2, losing that pawn. Okay, so black now is 1 pawn up. And you might think, well, isn't there prospects for these pawns? Well, king safety has been shot to pieces. The first thing black does here is just reinforce that horrible knight, and also threaten now a mate in 3, beginning with queen g4 check. And if the king moves back here, then queen g1. And then queen e1, that's the mate in 3 threat, making use of that pawn controlling d3, by the way. And if the king had gone there, then queen g1. So there's a mate in 3 threat with queen g4 check here, which needs to be addressed. White plays now rook e2. This looks like a horrible position in any case. Other moves, yeah, they're all pretty bad, grim for White here. We see now rook e8, This might not be the most accurate attacking move, though. The engine suggests check and then rook d8 to try and get the rook down to the first rank. But anyway, we'll follow this. a4, and now queen f4 with horrible threats to parry. So white plays king h1 there, but now rook d8, so introducing rook d1 check with a mate in 4, because after king g2, queen takes h2. It's just horrible for white to try and defend this. Queen c3, okay, is check. That's check, otherwise that would be losing to the check here. So getting time there for this next move, queen c2, to defend that d1 square. But now we see the move rook d3. So this is very, very dangerous stuff now. Rook d3, shielding the e4 pawn, basically, which means with that e4 pawn shielded, that black is now in the position to play a move like queen g4 to threaten nasties. Let's have a quick look. If rook d3 is not played and queen g4, we're not actually threatening too much here for black. It's actually possible to play this because the bishop's holding g1. So yeah, black needs to have some care here for what he's doing. But rook d3 has got ideas of potentially queen g4, not with the idea of g1, but actually doubling here, preparing to double for rook d1 would be absolutely the more crushing idea, in fact. So temporarily shielding e4, giving time for doubling there. So a very interesting idea, rook d3. Technically, the engine suggests actually in this position, rook d2 is strong, like +5, believe it or not. For example, rook takes, knight takes. We've now got this mate in 2 threat with check, bishop goes back, and then queen f3. So the bishop will be blocking in the king there. So that's a mate in 2 threat, which I think is a bit tricky to address. If queen d1, e3, and now we've got this idea of check, king going there, then knight f3. It's all pretty nasty. That e pawn looks pretty nasty. So yeah, black could have just put it away, it seems, with rook d2 here, according to engines. But both players must have been getting no, this is after the time control hour at move 41. So rook d3 is a very clever move, though, with the idea of queen g4 to d7. Now we see a5. But there's also another idea available, not just this queen g4 idea to d7 that's made use of here, which is also pretty strong. Knight e1. So knight e1 implies now a mate in 5 threat. Queen f3 is also attacking the queen, but queen f3 check is also on the cards. Or queen f3 or queen f1, as well as taking the queen. So white now has very difficult decisions. The thing is, okay, why can't the knight be taken? This is another clever point of this, that after rook takes e1, there's not much else. Black now plays rook d2, double attacking the queen, and also to threaten mate on h2. So very strongly played from Grischuk to reach this position. White has to give up the queen. So queen takes d2. What else? There's nothing else. The engine don't. This check doesn't. Unfortunately, it doesn't do anything. This random check. Black doesn't have to take this bishop. Otherwise, that would be actually 0. The perpetual check time. Black just can safely ignore this. The best move to it is safely ignore it. Not here because there's queen b3, but actually king h8. And if check, then you can take this, and there's no problem. c7's controlled. So yeah, that could be safely ignored here as a desperate check possibility. But yeah, white plays queen takes d2. Queen takes d2, and I think could have safely resigned this position basically at move 45. But Fabiano plays on. He plays rook e3. If he takes the pawn, it's just a nasty pin here with queen d5 to win the rook. So the pawns are coming down now, herded by the queen potentially. White keeps an eye though. It doesn't want white to get a pawn to a7, so keeps an eye on a6 there, stopping a6. If a6 had been played in this position, sorry, after rook e3, f5, if a6 had been played, well, this is the position, a6 here, don't think works because of f4. These pawns with the queen are going to be mating the king. So let's see, in the game, king g1 was played, queen a2, rook e1, and now here, the move f4 was played in any case of e4. If white takes on e4 here, then queen b1 check now wins the rook. Yeah, so a6 was played, trying to establish a pawn on a7. And black could even just take on a6, but plays e3, so threatening, shutting down the bishop, threatening queen f2 check, winning the rook. We see check here. Now the rook moves here, so that was the idea of the check, support that. But here lots of moves win for black. It's totally gone really. Black played check, check, and in this position queen g4 check and white resigned. It's actually a forced mate here after queen g4 in either 7 or 5 depending on white's next move. I'll show you both. It's a mate in 7 if king h1. Black plays the move f3. It doesn't matter about this pawn anymore. These threats are too quick. Is also attacking the bishop. So rook g1, queen takes d4, and whatever white does, apparently it's a forced mate in 5 here. After e2, letting the pawn queen, because we're now threatening queen takes g1. So this is diabolical. Say h3, then f2. We're now threatening f takes queening. So this is why it's such a forced mate. The queen's unbelievable with the pawns here. So anyway, yeah, after queen g4, yeah, white had enough. The quicker way to lose is just here, f3, threatening queen g2 and queen e2, and also the bishop. So here we just take the bishop. Yes, hopeless. So yes, one small inaccuracy there from one of the top-rated players in the world. If we go back to the critical position, it's amazing to think even the super-grandmasters at move 32, so there were a few moves to get to the time control, played actually king g1, and this basically lost. This knight is just naughty, exceptionally naughty in what it's doing here. Supporting knight takes g2 now. So white was in fear of knight d3, but now, yeah, it's just crumbling to bits after knight takes g2. If something like this, just one more possibility, taking here. If taking here, then knight e1 is pretty horrible. As well as f3 being weak. It's just a horrible position for white to play. Knight h4. We've just damaged. Black has damaged the pawns here. It's going to win that f3 pawn. It'll be a bit like the game. So this just went totally downhill for white after this one inaccuracy. So yeah, well played to Grischuk for generating those possibilities though, and winning with the black pieces. So Fabiano Caruana hasn't been losing too many games, but now it opened up the field for many players to be leading on the same points, about 5 or 6 players on the same points now. So very, very exciting tournament that's just been opened up in the FIDE Grand Prix in that round 9. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.